All right, welcome to the next DigiLogic webinar. Today we will be talking about the African Continental Free Trade Area and how it has the potential to transform the logistics industry. And I'm Charlotte Edzard, I'm your host today, and I have with me today Gugulethu Siso from Thumeza. She's the CEO of Thumeza. And he has also attended actually a training session on the African Continental Trade Area with the under 40 CEOs. So I'm really excited to hear more about that. Then we have with us Ifi Ogo. She's the regional coordination specialist for AfCFTA at the United Nations Development Program. And then we have with us Bosco Haule. He's the head of ports operations at the Africa Global Logistics. So really happy for all of you to be here. And to start with, first things first, we'll start with a short round of introductions with more than just the name and position I have already mentioned. So I will get a head start with that. My name is Charlotte. I work as an innovation manager at the Digital Hub Logistics in Dortmund. We are a digital innovation hub based in Germany. And I also work as a coordinator for the DIGILOGIC project, which is a project funded by the European Union under the Horizon 2020 program, where we also developed a trend radar for logistics on the African continent. So quite exciting. And with that, I'd like to hand over to our three speakers that we have with us today. And I'd like to kindly ask you to shortly introduce yourself, the role that you have at your company, and maybe also the connection that you have to the African Continental Free Trade Area. So we already know a little bit about that. So maybe let's start with Gugu. I'll hand over to you first.
Awesome, no problem. Thanks for that, Charlotte. Hi, everyone. My name is Gugulethu Siso, but please feel free to call me Gugu. I am the CEO as well as the co-founder of Thumeza. So Thumeza is a fintech that uses a loan management platform in order to provide credit to the logistics sector, predominantly working with small-scale logistics transporters as well as small-scale traders. So I'd say I see our role within the AfCFTA as providing liquidity to the logistics sector. As you very well know, it's a very capital-intensive sector rather, and we're working to remove some of those obstacles to ease up the flow of goods across the continent. Thanks.
Thank you, Gugu. And over to Bosco.
So I was just introducing myself. I'm Bosco Haule. I'm working as head of ports operation in Africa Global Logistics. Africa Global Logistics is part of a Mediterranean shipping company. We are basically purely serving as a logistic company for the whole of African continent. So basically, this is the real forum for us to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bosco. And over to Ifi.
Hello again. Hi, I'm Ifi. I work as the regional specialist on the AfCFTA at the United Nations Development Program. In terms of the work I do on the AfCFTA, in the previous role at the UNECA, I was part of the team that supported the negotiations and quite a few of the implementation plans around the continent. And in this role, our portfolio supports continues to support implementation from the policy advisory side and supporting with MSMEs on market access, intelligence, also the enablers of trade, which include trade facilitation and logistics.
Awesome. Thank you very much, all three of you. So now let's dive into the topic. And obviously, you three know what the AfCFTA is, but maybe some of our listeners won't. So I'll just give a very short overview of what it actually is. The African Continental Free Trade Area is the world's largest free trade area, bringing together more than, or actually 55 countries and 8 regional economic areas on the African continent. And the aim of this free trade area is to enable and ease the free flow of goods and services across the continent, eliminate trade barriers, and boost the trade in general. so much for just a very broad overview. So now I'd like to dive into the first question with you. And the first thing I'd like to know from you is, where do you currently foresee the greatest challenges in the logistics and industry in Africa? And how do you foresee the AfCFTA to support in solving these challenges? And maybe this time, let's start with you, Bosco.
Before we take a deep dive in the topic, let's first understand our 4 key words in this topic. First of all, AfCFTA, what is it? It's Africa Continental Free Trade Area. It's one of the flagship projects of Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. It is a high ambition trade agreement with a comprehensive scope that includes critical areas of Africa's economy, such as digital trade and investment protection, among other areas. By eliminating barriers to trade in Africa, the objective of AfCFTA is to significantly boost intra-Africa trade, particularly trade in value-added products and trade across all sectors of Africa's economy. Supply chain is another term which is important in this discussion. It's defined as lines of various points involved in manufacturing and delivering goods and or services from the procurement stage to the final consumer. Supply chain is basically applied in our daily life, from household to large industry. When you get your tea in the morning, there is a supply chain involved. Someone will bring sugar, someone will bring the bites and things like that. So that is, supply chain is also involved in our day-to-day life. Logistics is defined as the set of procedures and tools essential for organizing products with a focus of quantity, geographical location, carrier, transport medium, and specific delivery time frame. Transform is to change completely the appearance or character of something or someone for the purpose of improving that thing or person. It is about taking another form or state or changing shape. So this is a basic understanding of what we are going to talk in this topic today, the potential for Africa to transform, of the potential of AfCFTA to transform the logistics industry in Africa. Now let's look on the challenges which we see in terms of the current great challenges in the logistics industry in Africa. From my views, there are many challenges, but I will talk about 5 main challenges which I see. Number one, Africa is lacking the proper technology. Technology which is being used by Africa is diffusing from developed countries to African countries. Africa does not own their own innovations. So that means the technology which is coming is not tailor-made to solve the problems of Africa. The second is leadership willingness, readiness, and priorities. There is a need for Africa leadership, willingness, readiness, and prioritization. An example of missing priority can be seen in the AfCFTA, which is declared as a flagship project of 2063, 40 years to come. 50 years as we speak, so that means this priority is not even going to be implemented during my lifetime. Maybe when I'm 90, I'm not so far sure if I'll be still existing, but if I'll be existing, I'll be too old to do anything in terms of this. So that means we are not taking this priority to the current generation. We take this to the next generation. Who knows, they'll think about this. Who knows, the technology will be waiting for us. So that means we need to act promptly. The third is about political instability. Political instability leads to disruption in supply chain as well as challenging the cross-border movement of goods and or services. For example, recently we have several coups in West and Central Africa. August 2023, this year, Gabon. July 2023, this year as well, Niger. January 2022, last year, Burkina Faso. September 2021, Guinea. April 2021, Chad. And August 2020, Mali. So you can see almost 7 coups in Africa within a span of 3 years. This is a very bad situation in terms of political instability. The fourth is about poor supply chain infrastructure. According to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development report, the world consisted of 46 least developed countries, out of which 33 were in Africa, 9 in Asia, 3 in Pacific, and 1 in Caribbean. African countries are still fighting with their basic needs, which we talk about: food, water, shelter, and clothing. Before they solve those problems of getting the basic needs to their people, it's really difficult for them to invest heavily in proper technology, to invest heavily in supply chain infrastructure, to invest in educational transformation or heavy sector transformation. So that is why you'll continue seeing Africa going backwards instead of moving forward. The last, which is from my list, is about lack of a skilled workforce. Inadequate training and education program, as well as a brain drain of a skilled workforce to developed countries, is also killing Africa. Currently, those who are well skilled, who have good command of the supply chain initiative, who can transform the country logistics sector, are drained out of their countries for better pay, because African countries mostly are under the least developed countries, and that being the case, they cannot pay even good salaries to these people to retain them to stay in their respective countries. Thank you for now.
So Google, do you want me to pose the question again, or are you ready?
No, that's fine. I was following along. I was actually really interested in what Bosco was talking about, because you can tell when someone is working across the African continent that some of the issues that you might be facing on the other end, he's facing on a day-to-day basis. So for us, oddly enough, what we're facing, I would say the biggest issue that we're facing right now is settlement of funds. I'll be very honest. So we a fintech that works in South Africa. We've got clients as well as in Kenya and in Uganda, right? So you'll find that for me to be able to get funds out of South Africa to borrow my clients within the logistics sector in Kenya, the easiest way for me is to literally get it maybe through a third-party remittance service such as Wise, get it out of the continent, get it to the UK or the US, and then bring it in. It's cheaper and it's faster for me, right? Second issue is even just getting out of your home economy in Africa is a nightmare. The kind of hoops that you have to jump through, like right now, we've got a transaction that is currently in the pipeline, and I've got a bit of anxiety because they're asking me 110 questions about where's this money going, and you've got all the relevant paperwork, but there always seems to be something that has to be done for you to get the money out. And as you can imagine, logistics is a very capital intensive as well as fast industry. So you've signed the paperwork with your client, right? And you're telling them that my value proposition is that I'm fast. I can get the funds to you quickly so that you can accept that contract and head straight to the border to go load your goods. Meanwhile, here you are 10 days later, still fighting to get the money out of your bank. It's not something that you can easily explain. And when you try and do so, it makes it seem as if you're trying to make excuses, right? The other issue that I would say we are facing predominantly as liquidity partners right now is dispute resolution. So once again, I said that we've got clients in Kenya and Uganda. Let's say someone doesn't pay us in time or refuses to pay us and negotiations have broken down, right? The next step is for you to go to dispute resolution. Unfortunately, here you are as a company based in South Africa or XYZ country, right? And your client is based on the other end of the continent. Which regulation is the one that's actually taking precedent? What jurisdiction are you going for, right? So now you have two options where you go for your home jurisdiction, which means that you have to go through the dispute resolution process in your home country. And then hopefully, if you get it done in your favor, you then have to take that judgment, right, and take it to your client's home country, go through the same process again before you even get your money. So this is, it's really frustrating because you start wondering that, okay, banks make a bit more sense because, they've got quite a bit of money. It makes sense for them to pursue this. But what about a trader or a small scale transporter who only has one truck and wants to move goods between, let's say, Zambia and I'm not even going far, Tanzania, right? And they're being owed $200. Are you going to be willing to go through that dispute resolution mechanism that's currently in place just to get $200? I don't think so. So I'd say what I'm hoping to see from the AfCFTA, from the first one, perhaps, honestly, if perhaps can do so, I'm really keeping my fingers crossed. As well as I think the integrations of larger startups such as Paystack that are connecting the continent more and more. So I'm hoping that the AfCFTA will be able to help spur their growth. As to the second part, I'm truly hoping for more accessible as well as affordable dispute resolution mechanisms. I know that currently they're saying that go to your home country and ask them to fight for you, but realistically, is your government going to fight for a $200 transaction? I don't think so. So I'm hoping that with the clever minds that we have on the continent, especially trade lawyers and guys such as Ify, something can be done that really takes into context that what you do when business goes wrong. Because right now we're really focused on connecting it, but we're not quite thinking of how does someone get relief should a transaction go wrong.
Thank you so much, Gugu. Very interesting and very happy to hear also that you are keen on involving further startups for the solution. So that's really cool. Perfect. And actually, that was also very good leaning over to Ify. So Ify, I'd like to hand over to you to answer the question.
Right. So no, thanks. And it's been interesting hearing the previous speakers. So one thing I wanted to first clarify was, yes, while the Agenda 2063 is the overarching blueprint, if you will, for Africa's development ambitions, it's not the timeline for each and every program or activity or action or component of it. For example, the AfCFTA, for the implementation of the Protocol on Trading Goods, takes a 10 to 15-year timeline, in the sense that there is a specified timeline in which countries can or are stipulated to take down the tariffs on trading goods. Another thing to note is that with trade, it never ends. The former chair of the negotiation forum, the AfCFTA negotiation forum, Ambassador Osakwe Lodresuso, always said, it never ends. A good trade deal is one that isn't done, because as life evolves, you will have to evolve the agreement itself. So the AfCFTA is something that necessarily should continue to evolve. So I wanted to state that first. Now, in terms of the challenges, and I'd like to also point to the UNDP Futures Report 2020. One of the articles in this, makes the point that the AfCFTA is not separate from the macro environment. And so you've heard from Google about payments, you've also heard about logistics, you've heard about political will. It's important to keep this in mind. The AfCFTA is, yes, a very important instrument on the continent, but it continues to operate within Africa. It will affect things that happen in Africa, and will also be affected by things that happen in Africa. It will drive good. We're already beginning to foresee trade flows. We just came back from the Inter-African Trade Fair, hosted by Afreximbank, the AU, and the AfCFTA Secretariat. I'm aware of trade deals that happened there. Before that, I'm aware of trade deals that have happened across the continent. I'm aware of investment projects for production. I know of entrepreneurs that have increased their productive capacity to be able to meet the demand outside their home countries on the continent. So the point to make here is that there's many challenges. There's some things that will be fixed by policy. There's some things that will be fixed as businesses grow and as trade becomes more sophisticated. For example, to Google's point about having challenges with disputes across the continent. From a legal point of view, yes, it's what she said is true. There are state-to-state based mechanisms, but a lot of the time it's not worth it for the entrepreneur. It takes up too much time and cost. What may be good to see as trade evolves is the setting up of industry standards that can address some of these issues, industry groups that can address these issues, things like escrow services that can address these issues. The law or a dispute process may eventually become not the first response, but the last resort, because do you really want to go to a court somewhere every time there's a problem, right? So there are things that will be fixed by systems and institutions in the public sector, and there are things that would be fixed as, I would think, the industries grow, as people interact more, as just the trade itself becomes more interesting and more sophisticated. And now to your specific question, what may be some of the greatest challenges? Today, you can send anything from any point in Africa to any point. The question for you is the time and the cost and the process. So from a trader's perspective, thinking about the AfCFTA, and the underlying argument for the AfCFTA is that when Africa trades with itself, or one of the underlying arguments, when Africa trades with itself, Africa trades in more value-added products. And so it's not just about trade. It's about trade that drives transformations, about trade that creates jobs. It's about trade that creates opportunities for people. But if that cost of trade is too high, it then eats away at the very point of what the person is trying to do. So in terms of what some of the challenges are, is that one, the trade levels need to increase. As they increase, there needs to be better sight into the trade so that you connect the traders. Traders know themselves. Traders in Africa a lot of the time move in groups. They understand each other. They understand what the market is. But then across regions, remembering that we already have what we call RECs in Africa. So there's, trade blocks in the east, in the west, in the north, and in the south. Now connecting what may be disparate groups across the continent can help to bring down the cost of trade, in the sense that there's people already trading. There's networks, there's channels. Better connecting those can contribute to bringing down the cost of trade, can contribute to saying, okay, we can take away some of the frictions here and there. And then beyond just, the site that allows more, connectivity, are now the broader issues where we get into trade infrastructure, where we get into trade facilitation. And those are a lot of the time policy concerns, policy issues that, if we're being honest, are being addressed. If you look at the last 5-6 years and you look at the turnaround time at ports, a lot of the time it's come down. If you look at the turnaround time at airports, a lot of the time it's come down. A lot of the complaints come when you think about land crossings. But then around land borders, the argument that may be made from the policy side that the only concern there is not trade. There are also concerns about immigration. There are concerns about public safety. There are concerns about security. And so the treatment of goods at land borders is not always the same, perhaps at those ports where, trade is the center and the goal. So my suggestion is that as we think about these challenges, is to disaggregate, not to paint with a broad brush, but to say, what are the concerns? How are they located within the macro space? and what are the policy and private sector perspectives, capabilities that can address them as we go along. Thanks, and I'll hand over here.
Thank you so much, Iffy, for that very, very interesting, insight and also overview and your perspective on that. I'd like to actually follow up maybe right away with you, jumping to the next question, but connecting it to what you just said now. So what I'm interested in is how the AfCFTA will affect the development and the implementation of innovations and technologies, especially in the logistics sector, but as you said, it's all connected. So you may also transfer that to a broader space. And maybe also I'd like to know, since you raised that there are different measures to be taken on the policy side, but also on the industry side. So I'd like to hear about your perspective on that. Iffy, if you don't mind starting right away again.
Certainly. No, I think that, the prospect of a market is appealing. If you look at tech startups, their decks over the last year or two, you'd see there's a trend, build for Africa, build for Africa. This has always been a thing, to build for the continent, but I think the emergence of the AfCFTA in the last few years has also driven a sense of, it's possible to build for more than one or only a few markets. So yes, I imagine there are people who are thinking of how to solve problems, directly with the trade, directly with logistics. Google here is one of those, and started out in one way, and it's like, there's more than one way to approach this, and every day you see a solution for cross-border payments or cross-border logistics, or sending goods or identifying buyers. So the AfCFTA has the potential, because it's so new and it's so large, to embed all kinds of innovations for trade, for productivity, for all aspects of that. Now, what needs to happen? Again, I'll say, what is the AfCFTA? It's a trade agreement. While yes, there's a lot of promise, a lot of expectation, we're already seeing that it's doing quite a bit of what it is set out to do. Remember that it is state parties, the countries themselves, that lead the process. It's not a supranational agreement, it's trade. So if there's so much that needs to happen, in the sense that the countries themselves have to want the innovations. It has to fit within the regulatory frameworks of those countries. For example, across Africa, we've seen a few countries come up with startup acts, but others haven't. Again, you're going back to the political economy. Is it a priority for those countries, the specific innovation? Where would be best to operate out from? Is this something that is welcome? If it is, great. If it isn't, what are the approaches? How to engage? So it's, again, there's a real need for a more nuanced conversation about things. Continentally, there's the digital transformation strategy. There's the AfCFTA digital trade protocol. So yes, well, countries in principle have agreed to certain, benchmarks or objectives for the continent, and we hope will, move to implement them. At the end of the day, the AfCFTA is implemented by countries. So the levels of innovation, the extent to which those innovations take root and grow, a lot of the time will depend on the climate of the countries, will depend on the willingness, on the political will. It would also depend on those who want to build as well. There's a joke I've heard, like, not everything is fintech, and that's true. There are real problems that need real solutions, and there's opportunity for Africans to begin to think about, okay, what are the specific problems around these things? And then, there's also another very real question, I think, that needs to be asked. Is this something that tech can fix? Is this a business problem? Is this an industry? What is the size of the problem? What is the scale of the problem? And then when you think about technology, what's the most efficient application of technology? If the problem itself is not solved, technology may not really be more than a cosmetic application to it. But there needs to be hard thinking to solve hard problems, and then consistent engagement with the public sector to understand the priorities, to make a case for the kinds of solutions, and see where things go.
Thank you so much, Iffy. And Gugu, what do you think about that, especially with Thumeza having the business model basically in data-driven financing? So yeah, looking forward to hear your perspective.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I loved Ife's joke of not everything is fintech. If you're in the startup world, you really would think it is, purely because I think about 90% of the funding is going to that sector. I think I'd like to add on to the point about tech really not being the one size fits all solution that we think is going to bring into the sector. Drawing our attention to the number of logistics tech startups that have shut down within this year alone, guys such as Sandy. I think I've got a personal friend of mine who's got a startup in Mozambique doing really great work, but the problems are really much bigger than what tech can do, right? It's kind of like coming at someone with a gaping bullet hole and coming with a Band-Aid and saying, oh, look, it stopped it at some point. That's not going to work, right? So I think as if you are saying that there needs to be a bit of a different approach, going back to maybe looking at business from a boring perspective, actually sitting down to look at the unit economics of what we're solving to see if it actually makes sense instead of just throwing money at solving cosmetic problems, especially within the logistics sector where everyone thinks that an app or a marketplace is going to, help by coordinating movements of goods. But unfortunately, if there's no one on the ground actually taking the time to understand what exactly is going on within the logistics sector, right? You're going to build a really, really cool app, or at the end of the day, to be honest, that app isn't going to get used and you're going to be using an Excel sheet, but you've raised a crap load of money, but the problem is still isn't going to get solved, which is why I'm really getting excited about really boring businesses that really are putting a lot of work into solving the issues that are there. So things such as one-stop border posts, right? It's not something that a lot of people think about. But when you think of the tech as well as the infrastructure itself that goes into connecting two countries, right? Tech systems as well as processes, and having them agree that, okay, what happens in country A and what happens in country B is going to be the same thing. That's incredible, right? So I'm seeing, those differences that take place in countries such as Zim and Zambia, because I think we've got the one-stop border post in Chirundu, where, you can get your goods cleared at the one border post if you're coming from Zim, getting to Zambia, vice versa, right? So waiting times have been cut down significantly, and the number of trucks that are being cleared on a day-to-day basis, oddly enough, are outweighing the Kazungula border post that is connecting three borders, right? So 3 countries rather. So you just think that it's really the boring infrastructure as well as the boring problems that should get solved through things such as one-stop border post. I think that's really what that's the kind of tech intervention that we need. Also, of course, just a nod to standardization of processes, things such as invoices, tariffs, and all that other stuff. But to be honest, that's kind of like the icing on the cake. If you cannot get people to agree on a standardized process that's going to be used, everything else does not make sense. So I'd say tech is really just the icing on the cake through getting people to agree on certain set processes between them.
Thank you, Gugu. And now, Bosco, I can see that you have rejoined. Let's see if your audio signal is maybe a little bit better now. I'd like to just shortly restate the question in case you missed it. So how will the AfCFTA affect the development and implementation of innovations and also technologies? And from your perspective, maybe especially in the ports area.
Thank you so much. Basically, I heard about Ife and Gugu. I think they have highlighted quite a very good insights. And basically from my side, I think one of the biggest challenges which I look in Africa is this about the infrastructure. So if we manage to improve the transport sector, the infrastructure, because it's not easy. The connection with the maritime, air transport, as well as the road network in Africa is not that good. So that is the problem, that it's even easier to go to fly to Europe and then go back to Africa than going from one country to the neighbor country, you see. So that is an area which requires significant investment and significant improvement, so that at least when we talk about improving the AfCFTA, it means you are basically already talking about something which you have, if you have goods from one country, you can basically move them to the next, to the neighboring country. There is a very good example of DRC Congo, which is very close to us here in Tanzania. But moving from North Congo to South Congo, they have to go to another country. So you see, that is a very, very bad situation we are talking about. The other issue is about the trade barriers. I know that we have, my colleagues have already highlighted about the trade barriers, but I think we have an important area to look at, because if you look on the current situation, we have quite a lot of barriers, including these customs clearance issues. We have restricted some of the roads. You have excessive traffic. You have even someone, because of these bureaucracies in the countries, someone can even stop the trucks from moving from one country to the other. So those things, if they can be at least looked at and improved, I believe we can also be better. In my discussion before, I wanted to touch base on the education part, because if I understand correctly, we have the challenge of, I know that we have people who have no jobs in Africa, and there are quite a lot of them, but they are getting education which is not supporting them as well. So when it comes to the labor market, I remember I have done several interviews, even from my country itself, to get people to work in the logistics sector. You have so many graduates from logistics, but when you come to the know-how, you see the knowledge they have is completely different from what you are looking for. So that means even to tailor-make the education system to reflect the needs of the country or the African respective goals, that means it can also help us to improve on that area. The other part is about adapting to digital supply chain systems. Currently, as I mentioned before, we have technology is basically diffusing from developing countries. So that means we don't own that technology, but basically currently we need to transform and accelerate our countries, because that is the way it is going, to use technology, to use digital transformation, and also to foster digital economy in that area. I think those are the key areas which we can do and improve the AfCFTA operations.
Thank you so much, Bosco. Connecting to that, I'd like to move on to the final question. And actually, you just mentioned quite a few very strong challenges that are still existing on the African continent, ranging from the lack of infrastructure, maybe also the lack of education that is fit to the actual needs of the industry. Maybe also fragmentation of the market. So with all those challenges in mind, how have they been affecting the design of the AfCFTA already? And what is the way forward? What measures are there in order to maybe even influence the direction that the AfCFTA is going? And maybe let's start with Gugu again.
Thanks for that, Charlotte. So I would say one of the issues that's really worrying me at this particular point is the brain drain within the logistics sector. There's something that is not exactly limited to the logistics sector alone, but really most of the industries in Africa as a whole. So what we've seen is that, from my experience, because we also used to be a logistics aggregator, right? Even though I'm in finance, so we're quite familiar with all the issues taking place throughout the whole value chain, is that the benefits, or rather the unit economics of the logistics sector themselves are not trickling down to the people actually doing the work on behalf of, let's say, their idea people, right? So you find that we'll be here, like in this meeting, having done a deal together, right? To say, oh, cool, okay, cool. I'll move your manganese from, the DRC into, I don't know, Egypt, right? That's all good. I'm going to get 100 million. These are my margins. I'm getting, let's say, a 30% margin, right? Then you find that of those margins, the people that are actually the ones doing the work, right? Predominantly the truck drivers, as well as the clerks, the people that Bosco saying that know what they're doing, right, are not exactly seeing the benefits of these enormous deals that we're coming to negotiate. So we're really facing a large brain drain, especially within the trucking sector, where I think almost every day in my own field, we're hearing of one company that's hiring truck drivers because most of the truck drivers are going to Europe. I think most predominantly the UK. I'm not quite sure what's so great about the UK for truckers, but it seems to be quite a very attractive market. So as you can imagine, it's a very stressful job, right? And you need someone who knows exactly what they're doing, 1, 2, who can be trusted to deal with the processes at the port or any border post or whatever, right? So you'll find that companies are always in this cycle of hiring, right? Imparting knowledge and then seeing people living, right? So if you're always in the cycle, you're not exactly going to be operating at your best. But oddly enough, we're not quite seeing people are not quite appreciating that, hey, actually work at retaining the people who are core to your operation so that you don't have to keep going through this process on a day-by-day basis. The other one is, I think, was it Bosco or Iffy who are saying that also political will, right? You'll find that infrastructure, if someone already got their infrastructure in place, I think case in point, South Africa has got, I think 70% of the rail infrastructure in sub-Saharan Africa that's actually active. So as you can imagine, as the AfCFTA starts, picking up speed, how are you going to compete with someone who already has got that level of infrastructure in terms of moving goods? We're not even saying logistics, just getting goods from point A to B in its most basic sense, against someone who does not have any infrastructure at all, right? So as much as we can keep talking about this, really it's I think from our governments, it's just that will to just say, okay, we're going to make this happen and we're going to put the resources to make it happen, as well as from the private sector to really look within ourselves to say, okay, cool. Am I also not responsible for some of the brain drain that's taking place? What am I offering to my workers to stay, as opposed to, going to greener pastures? So I would say really it's just implementation as well as goodwill that we need to focus on in order to ensure that the AfCFTA can contribute to elevating some of these factors.
Thank you, Gugu. Bosco, over to you. What is your perspective?
It's very challenging to find that, like in Africa currently, if you look on the reports, we have so many countries which are currently in the list of least developed countries. So that means you talk about 60% of all the African countries are under that category. So if you are in that category, it means most of the countries in Africa, they are still fighting for the basic needs. They are talking about the food, they are talking about water, they are talking about the shelter and things like that. So which are just basic, and they are still fighting to get their people get a daily meal, So if you are fighting for basic needs, it's very hard to invest in infrastructure. So that means what is really required is not only to jump to this infrastructure and whatever. It's first of all, Africa has to fight to make sure that they get the basic needs, and it should not be a point of discussion as soon as possible. And then we can move to the next level, because you cannot move to the next level if you are still fighting for those basic needs. And the second part, which I see as another challenge, if we continue doing what we have been doing in the past, like in the education sector, we should not expect miracles. People will not just change because they want to change, but they will change if we want them to change. So if we want them to change, that means we have to force and change the current curriculum to train people to the direction or to the goals of which we want people to transform to. So currently, there is no synchronization between these objectives and the educational changes in those respective countries. I mean, in all the African countries, because we need to adapt to a technology, we need to adapt to the education system, which basically will support this AfCFTA. So the other part is about the fragmented markets, which we just mentioned before, that we have a very good, powerful African culture. This African culture is basically, if we use it well, it can be part of integral to the economy of the African. But currently, if you look on the culture, most of the culture which we are entertaining, like I'm talking about my country as well, we have the Maasai, we have even the other tribes which are small. They say that they keep their culture, but basically they are living in the Stone Age. So if you keep that culture and you don't use the culture to transform to the new ways of life, then we are not going to move forward. So my thinking is also we need to move and influence the political will. The corruption should be at least avoided. The abuse of power should not be part of our life. The political instability, which I just mentioned before, we should start getting the right people in the positions. But those who are in the position, they should also feel the responsibility to save their country and the people in those countries. But also we need to look on the languages. We have so many languages in Africa. So like now we are talking, before we didn't have even the language which can unite all the Africans together. Now at least we see Kiswahili is somehow coming up, which means that at least most of the African countries can start talking in the same language. So when we talk in the same language, at least we can unite ourselves and we can be looking forward to address some of these challenges together. Those are my views on that part.
Thank you very much, Bosco. And finally, Ifi, I'd like to hear from you as well.
Thanks. So no, a lot has been said, and I think a lot of the issues have been covered. What I would say is that, yes, well, there are challenges. Again, if you look at the trends of the last few years, you'll see a lot of investment into infrastructure. For example, the African Development Bank, as one of its high fives, prioritizes infrastructure. And you'll see a targeted approach to cross-border infrastructure. So whether it's connecting Senegal and Gambia, or Nigeria and Cameroon, or the work happening across the corridors, Lagos to Abidjan and some others across the continent. So you'll see there has been quite some investment from the AfCFTA and from even the regional blocs themselves and the countries. So while yes, there are challenges all around with countries, you also see a concerted effort, continuous investment, perhaps not at the scale that may be inspiring per se, or hyper inspiring, but there is investment and there is consistent work in this area, such that the connectivity problems are being addressed. Now, in terms of how I think these challenges affect the AfCFTA to transform the African logistics industry, again, there's the infrastructure part, and that's important. Perhaps it could be that as the volumes of trade increase, there might be more impetus towards addressing some of these issues. For example, the current approach, is that their priority corridors and routes that are known. But perhaps with the AfCFTA, some of these routes will become more competitive. If some of these routes become more popular, if some of the blockades on these routes are such that it's easier to go up north or down south via one route against another, then it becomes a bit more competitive, and that could attract a lot more investment into some of those routes. It could provide more of an imperative for countries to also say, okay, if I want my country that is on X or Y route to be able to benefit from the trade flows, to be part of what is happening, there's more imperative for these things. So one of the ways it could potentially happen is that as greater flows of trade are unlocked, it could then show more the viability of certain routes, which could also then inspire more action from countries and other partners towards investments and towards further taking down trade barriers.
Thank you so much, Ifi. Okay, very interesting, and actually very much building upon each other you did in your last comments. So thanks a lot for that. So now I would like to slowly approach the end of our webinar by giving you the possibility to give a closing remark. And what I would be interested in that final remark is which stakeholders do you want to give maybe a shout out to? Yeah, to get active, to engage, and to take responsibility to change something. So which stakeholders do you believe are the most important ones that should become even more active or active in the first place? And I'll give the word to Bosco at first.
I just started about talking about who should be or what can be done moving forward. So basically what I started is about the government and the state, the president or whoever the leadership in that particular country. They should at least be implementing what we agree or what is being agreed. So it's not something which is written, remain on papers, and nothing is being implemented. That is what I just mentioned before. The second part is about the stakeholders. We have stakeholders who are also supporting this AfCFTA. They should also be keen to make sure that if they should have objectives. If those objectives are not met, at least they should be reviewing them regularly, at least on a yearly basis, to understand what has not been met and why it's not met. Because this has to be a push, basically. And the other part is on the AfCFTA itself. This one, basically from my view, they need more education. If we look on the country like Tanzania, not many people understand that there is an Africa free trade or whatever agreements which is existing as of now. So it's very few people who understand this. So we need also to advocate or to do something in terms of training or in terms of even more broadcasting to the people to know what is happening and what people can contribute on that. That is my view and my thing.
Thank you, Bosco. So over to you, Ifi, for your closing remark.
Sure. No, just to say thank you for inviting me to this. It's been an interesting conversation. In terms of who you said shout out to, just to applaud the African producers and traders as they relentlessly explore opportunities and push the boundaries of trade. And UNDP continues to work with these traders, especially through trade groups, to advance their ambitions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ifi. Great. And finally, Gugu, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. And thank you so much, guys, for the invitation. Greatly appreciated. So I think I'd like to echo Ifi's sentiments. For me, mostly the private sector. But by private sector, the smaller guys, because we tend to think, oh, the large multinational companies, but you know, with your business that's operational within the country, but you're also looking to scale across the borders. I think those voices are definitely needed to be heard, because we're the ones actually doing the trade on the ground, you know, pushing those volumes. So shout out to you guys, but please let's make our voices a bit more heard. Otherwise, decisions are going to be made on our behalf, and we're going to have to live with them. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gugu. And thank you so much, all of you three. It has been a really interesting conversation. Thank you for the various perspectives that you brought onto this topic. I think it's a great enrichment and great insights to the viewers and the listeners of this webinar. And hopefully even the people that you shouted out to just in your last statement will listen and take it, take it with them. And thanks, Ifi, also for appreciating what has actually already been done or is currently being done. I think that's also important and oftentimes forgotten. So thanks a lot to all of you. And with that, I'd like to say thank you and goodbye to all of you, and hopefully see you soon.